All right, welcome everybody. Please let me know if you can hear me. My name is Ryan, and it's great to be with you today for this webinar. We're going to be talking about teaching vocabulary. So something about me, I've been teaching and managing for about 20 years. I've taught many different levels, ages, and different contexts as well, business English, academic English, and so on. So hopefully I can pass on some useful advice for you today. Okay, thank you, Anna. You can hear me. All right. So it's just if you can type in the comments as well where you're from, it always is good to see people from around the world. So we've got Andy from Texas, USA. We've got Serendia from Illinois. That's great. We've got Zarin from Johannesburg, South Africa. Lots of people from South Africa, Cape Town, Durban. That's wonderful. Who else have we got here? We've got Ada from Romania. That's really great. Erin from Taiwan. Wow, that's really fantastic to see so many different nationalities and countries joining in. So I'm actually in Cambridge in the UK. It's very, very hot and sunny. And we've also got people from Canada. That girl named Carol. Okay, good to know. All right, let's get stuck in, shall we? So, teaching vocabulary. Just a note to say that we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of today's webinar. So if you've got some questions, just keep your powder dry until the end of the webinar, and then we'll have a Q&A session. I'll only be taking questions about today's webinar, about teaching vocabulary. Okay, so if you've got any technical questions about the course or anything else, you can open a ticket with our tutor support system. All right, so that will be the best way to answer technical questions about the course. Okay, so teaching vocabulary. So we talk about lexis. In other words, words and phrases. So we teach words, individual words. We teach phrases, for example, the long and winding road, tomorrow never comes, the cat sat on the mat, and so on. We teach collocations, so words that go strongly together with each other, the high frequency matching of words like coffee table or take a photo, for example. We can teach phrasal verbs like get in, calm down, chill out. Idioms, idiomatic language like it's raining cats and dogs is the classic idiom. A whole range of different lexical sets as well. So, for example, words connected with travel or words connected with food, for example. Okay, so there's lots to talk about when we talk about vocabulary. We can talk about um, the frequency of words, as in collocation. We can talk about formal and informal vocabulary. And we can talk about the kind of lexical approach to language teaching, where we teach chunks of language together rather than just individual words. Okay, so before I go any further, I want to ask a question, and if you can put the answer in the chat, that would be great. And my question is, should we pre-teach vocabulary in a lesson? I'm just going to write that. Should we pre-teach vocab? You'll spot my deliberate spelling mistake. All right. The reason why I'll ask that will become clear and hopefully we'll have some time to discuss that later. All right, it's a very simple survey. We'll come back to that later. One of the most important things about teaching, and especially for teaching vocabulary, is to elicit. Why do we elicit? Elicitation, as you will remember, is about asking rather than telling, in the basic level. We try to get this out of the students rather than just delivering the information to students. In other words, we can try to use the students as a resource, and we can assess what our students know by eliciting as well. If we don't ask them, we don't know what they know already. Okay. And we can't assume that they know the word that we're talking about. We have to find out. We have to do some discovery. And we can use questions for that. We can use different methodology in eliciting. Some students may have been exposed to the vocabulary that we're teaching already. They might be kind of familiar with that. They'll have even the most low-level students will have an idea about the vocabulary. They would have heard certain English words before, fast food, hot dog, hamburger, pizza, and so on. If we're talking about food, for example, technology words, laptop, computer, internet. But we can't assume that. We can't assume that they'll know words that we have selected for them. So eliciting is an absolute must. Okay. So why do we elicit? Why do we elicit? Well, one of the main reasons is there's much more student engagement. And we can involve students. We're not just delivering a lecture, it's interactive. It avoids letting the more passive students just sitting back and listening to what the teacher has to say. Okay, so there's much more student engagement. Lesson content is remembered much easier. Students can make associations with the vocabulary that we're teaching in context. We can give examples, and the information is much easier to remember that way if we elicit rather than just tell. And it's coming from the students themselves as well. So as I mentioned, also the teacher can assess what students already know. Maybe the students know a great deal about what we're going to teach already, but maybe they don't. Maybe we need to do a bit more work to make sure that they understand this new vocabulary, and how we can make sure that they understand that and know that they understand that we'll come to a bit later as well. So teachers can adjust the lesson to the students' needs as well. So we can be flexible. We know our students, or we should get to know our students, get to know our audience, and we can see if they're interested. We can gauge the level of enthusiasm and interest in the class. Hopefully they're not going to be bored by the content. They're not kind of losing the focus. They're not misbehaving, or they're off task for any reason. Or you've got the 1,000 yard stare that they're kind of students are zoning out because they're not quite sure of the context. They're kind of not really engaged in the lesson. So this is why we should elicit more than just tell. So we need to also find we need to kind of make sure that any misunderstood words are dealt with before going on with our lesson and continuing with the topic. We can't let things slide because it's going to be important for the progression of our lesson later. Or if there are any mistakes or errors occurring during your lesson, especially with the focus, the target vocabulary, we need to kind of clean that up before we move on. Okay, so really many good reasons why we should elicit. So how do we do that? Well, we can use examples like this one here about being late. The word that we're going for here is miss, or to miss the bus. So this morning I was late. The bus left 5 minutes before I arrived at the bus stop. What happened? I missed the bus. Okay, so hopefully we can elicit that. We can try to get that from our students. We can give other examples. It doesn't have to be the bus. It could be the train or the webinar, for example. Okay, so we can use elicitation methods, for example, for whatever the vocab that we are trying to teach. So how do we do that? We can use pictures, for example. Yep. We can use different techniques like facial expressions, body language, miming, role play, for example. We might be able to kind of like act out the situation to try and elicit. Think about any other methods. If you want to put that in the chat box. But here's one example that we can clearly see that the people have missed the bus, and this really kind of drives the concept home as well. Okay, so can you think of any other methods of eliciting vocabulary from students, and put that in the chat for me? Hopefully you're all using a great amount of visual aids when you're teaching your vocabulary. Any ideas? Well, I'll give you a clue. Are there any other different ways to say to miss the bus, or any other phrases that can convey the same meaning? What's the opposite of missing the bus, for example? So Ada says realia. Yes, very good. Yeah, absolutely. So what kind of realia could we use to elicit miss the bus, do you think? Or what kind of mime, what kind of facial expressions could we use? Newspaper articles for eliciting things of vocab. Yes. What do you mean? I need a bit more information with that, Trudy. Andrew says, ask them personal questions that are relatable. Ask personal questions that are relatable, likes and dislikes. Yeah. We can ask for experience, like students. Have you ever missed the bus before? Have you ever missed your plane? How did you feel about it? What happened? Why did you miss the bus or the plane? Okay. Yeah, very good. Here's a good example as well. Teaching 7 to 9-year-olds, I have used role playing and miming. Yes, very good. Okay, so there are lots of great ways for eliciting vocabulary. As we've mentioned, role play. For example, if the word that we're looking for is frightened, you can imagine we can have different scenarios to act that out, facial expressions, visuals, synonyms, antonyms. Here's another good example. You can use videos showing people missing the bus. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a video. If a picture speaks 1,000 words, then a video can convey a million words. Okay, you get the idea. So elicitation is very, very important. Okay. So other teaching methodologies for teaching vocabulary. So translation. What do you think about translation? Is it a good idea to translate? I don't know. It's very tempting to get students to translate or to translate vocabulary, but I think it's much better to not translate. It's you get a lot more out of other methods for conveying vocabulary. When a word is translated, you only get one translated word. For example, if you look up a word in a language dictionary, English language dictionary, you get the meaning of the word, you get the pronunciation, you get examples, you get synonyms, antonyms, collocations, all of that great stuff. Phrases, including the word as well. But you don't get that with a translation. So I definitely would recommend not being tempted to translate all the time and not getting your students into a habit of translating all the time. It's counterproductive, I think. And also, you're kind of missing out on a lot of great communication, a lot of fluency that you can use when you're teaching your vocabulary. Another thing to think about is to grade your language. So we want to not complicate the way that we explain a new language in the classroom, especially with low levels on the CEFR framework. We'll talk about that later as well. So if we've got, for example, excuse me, sorry about that. If we've got, for example, A1 or A2 students, it's going to be very difficult to use a lot of complicated language to convey the meaning. We can provide a simple context as well. For example, a role play, so we can mention that the words can mean different things in different contexts. So a teacher can clarify the meaning in context. So think about that. So a word might have several different meanings, and we want to be very clear about which meaning we're trying to convey during our lesson. Here's a comment. It's quite interesting. Translating basically gives the students the answer. That is true. But as I mentioned, I think you can get much more out of using other methods as well. And when we're talking about teaching vocabulary, it's not enough just to give the meaning of the word, which we'll see in just a moment. So let's talk more about teaching in context, teaching vocabulary in context. So which of one of these following examples is more likely to help students understand the meaning of miss the bus? So I want you to put your answers in the chat. So let's look at A. I missed the bus this morning. I arrived at the bus stop 2 minutes after it had left. Or, a different context, I was annoyed because I missed the bus. Which one of those best conveys the meaning of missed the bus? Is it A or B? And while you're thinking about that, here's a comment. Learning Afrikaans through translation was so difficult for me. I only understood the language when speaking and being exposed to Afrikaans in daily context. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Okay. So most of you are saying A. Well, you are correct. This is absolutely the right context. Why not B? Why should it not be B? What's wrong with B? What could the problem be with B? Think about this word annoyed. B is too vague. Okay. B connotates a negative feeling. All right. B portrays emotions. The focus is different. Okay, we're getting warm here. Doesn't relay to students why you missed the bus, just how you feel about it. Exactly. That's what we were going for there. So it doesn't convey the actual meaning. There's many, many reasons why we could be annoyed. It doesn't it's not the right context and not the right kind of the way to convey the meaning. And also, they might not know what annoyed means. So again, this is important for grading. It might be a word they haven't seen before, a new word they don't understand. Yeah, absolutely. Great work, everybody. You really understand what I'm trying to convey here. Yeah, of course. Yeah, the word annoyed may be too advanced for the learners. They may not know what it means. Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on. Let's talk about MFP. I'm sure you know what MFP is. Can you tell me what MFP is? Well, it's here actually. It's meaning, form, pronunciation. So hopefully you've been learning this in your course already. So when we teach vocabulary, the mantra is MFP, MFP. All of these things should be covered in a vocabulary lesson. Students don't know a word unless they know the meaning, the form, and the pronunciation. All of these different things. And we should probably teach vocabulary in this order: the meaning, the form, and then the pronunciation. Okay. We also should be aiming to focus on accuracy rather than fluency, first of all. So we want the students to know the word, to know how to write the word, how the word is spelt, and we want the students to be pronouncing the word properly before we can move on to fluency. Okay, so when you're confident, your students know the word, then we can move on, and later we can kind of develop the fluency of the vocabulary that we've been teaching in different contexts and different activities and so on. Okay, so MFP, really, really important. And of course, we have to check understanding. So we need to create these concept checking questions. Okay, so we can understand the meaning in context. Concept checking, a method used by a teacher to assess the students understand if the students understand the meaning in context. Okay, so what do we mean by context? We mean the word not in isolation. So the word in a sentence or a paragraph, for example. So if we're talking about, we go back to the word annoyed, for example. I was annoyed because I missed the bus. So once we teach the meaning, the form, and the pronunciation of the word annoyed, we can put that into context, and then we can show all the wonderful videos and examples and so on to really drive that home. But we need to be able to check the concept as well. So I'm sure you have understood and have been learning about how to create very useful concept checking questions. So let's have a look at this. Let's look at our missed the bus example. So I missed the bus. Look at these following concept checking questions and tell me which one do you think is the most effective or the most appropriate. Is it A, B, or C? So A, I missed the bus. Do you understand? B, did you get to school on the bus? And C, did you arrive on time and why? What do you think? A, B, or C? And maybe tell me what the problem is with the other choices. What do you think? Okay, got some very interesting answers here. Why? Okay, many people think it's C. Why? Why do you think it might be C, please? Did you arrive on time? Why? Where is the target language here? Hmm. Well, it's very interesting. Let's have a, before I give you the answer, let's have a look at your responses. A will embarrass the student. Well, if you say, do you understand? And all of your students will probably say yes. So you teach the vocabulary, you ask your students, do you understand? They will say yes, because they don't want to look embarrassed. And you say, great, I'm going to move on to the next part. But you have no idea if they really understand the concept or not. So A is definitely not a good question. B doesn't address the fact they may have arrived on a later bus. Exactly. Or they might have got a lift with a friend, for example. They might have walked to school and got there on time. It doesn't address the kind of the concept that we're going for. That's why B is the best option here for a concept checking question. Okay, so did you get to school on the bus? If the answer is yes, then it means they didn't miss the bus. If the answer is no, it could be that they missed the bus. Did you get the school on the bus? No. Why not? Because I woke up late, because I missed the bus, I didn't see the timetable, I got the wrong bus. So I hope you can see that. It B is the most accurate concept checking question. It addresses the concept that we're trying to convey here about missing the bus. All right. A is definitely not a good idea for any level, actually. To do you understand? It's not a concept checking question. C just doesn't address the context at all. It doesn't address the target language. There could be lots of different. And the other thing with A as well, we don't want to kind of embarrass our students as well. They're most likely say, yes, I do understand. Let's just have a comment here from Ada. A is never a good question. C, they could still arrive in time by using other means of transportation. So B, yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head there. Okay, that was very interesting. So you understand the importance of really thinking about creating good, strong concept checking questions. Let's go on. Let's talk about grading. Okay, grading language. So it's very important when you're trying to elicit and check the concept of your vocabulary. Okay, so grade the language that you use in class should not be more complicated than the language you're trying to convey. Okay, really very important to keep your teacher talk time down to a minimum, not use complicated language or grammar or sophisticated vocabulary when you're explaining new language. Okay, don't include more difficult word than the one you're trying to teach. It can be difficult, and it takes practice to get your grading correct, especially when you're starting out as a new teacher. But it's really important, especially with the lower levels. So the trick is to only use language that you know that your students know already. If you try to use new language to introduce new language, your students will lose track of the lesson, and it's going to be very difficult for you to keep that flow going. Okay, so make sure that you're grading your language. So as I mentioned before, the CEFR is the Common European Frame of Reference, and it works from A1 all the way up to C2. So A1 is beginner, then pre-intermediate, intermediate, and so on. And then we get up all the way to proficient user. Okay, so a lot of you will be non-native speakers, and you'll have a very good proficient level of English as well. So you've been through this journey already. You were once a beginner, and now you've progressed all the way up to proficient user. Okay, so this is what most language schools use. It's been around for over 20 years now. I'm going to put a document in the chat actually for you to learn more about the CEFR. And also, you can get some vocabulary profilers here as well. So, for example, this one is called Vocab Kitchen. And you can use this to profile and think about the words, where the words that you want to teach appear on the framework. Okay, very, very useful. Okay, here's a quick language grading task for you. What level are the following words? Are they A1, B1, or C1? So we've got three phrases here. I've been to Paris 3 times. My name's Fernando. I live in El Bonito. I'm not certain that you already really understand this concept. So if you can put in the comments, what level are the following phrases? 1, 2, 3. Is it A1, B1, or C1? Okay, so imagine that you're in the class. So they're all three of these phrases are different levels. So is 1 A1, is 2 B1, and 3 C1, or something different? Okay, it seems some of you are having some trouble with the link. I'm sorry about that. If I have some time later on, I'll see if I can find a working link for you. Apologies. Okay, let's see some of your answers. M says Okay, I'm not quite sure what you mean here, M. So I'm looking for 1 B1, for example, 2 C1. Okay, so Ada says 1 is B1, 2 is A1, and 3 is C1. Okay. Okay. And 1 B1, 2 A1, 3 C1 again. 1 B1, 2 A1, C1. Okay, I think you've got the right answer here. Okay, thank you, everybody. Looks good. Okay, yes, you're absolutely right. Yep. So 1 is B1, it's kind of intermediate level. I've been to Paris 3 times, so it's the present perfect. A B, kind of A2, B1 is where you start to kind of introduce this kind of language. 2, my name's Fernando. I live in El Benito. This is a beginner level. This might be in the very first lesson when um, it's on the first page of a student book, for example. And then 3 is a little bit more complicated, isn't it? I'm not certain that you really understand this concept. It's definitely more advanced, the B2 or C1 type level. Okay, well done, everybody. Okay, let's talk about recording new vocabulary. So, why is it a good idea for students to record their vocabulary? Well, it's teaching them good habits, good learning skills. So, we could use word cards, for example, for getting our students to record new vocabulary, or a vocabulary notebook, a separate notebook just for vocabulary is a very good idea. And what do you think we should include for each word? So before we were talking about dictionary entries for vocabulary and all the different things that are in a dictionary entry for a word. What kind of things should we include in there? Well, here's an example from a vocabulary card. So we've got the word here, a ghost. So what information have we got here? We've got the information that it's a noun. It's a countable noun. We've also got the phonemic transcript about the pronunciation, ghost. We've got some synonyms here. We've got a meaning, spirit or soul of a dead person. We've got an adjective form. So we've got the derivation. We've got kind of phrase like a ghost. A place which is believed to have ghost is haunted. So we've got some additional kind of vocabulary that is useful. We might have some collocation, a ghost town, for example. We've got some example sentences. I don't believe in ghosts. I saw the ghost of Elvis. Okay. Also, so we've got some good suggestions here. So pictures. We've got a picture here, not a very exciting picture, but enough to convey the meaning of the vocabulary ghost. Here's a comment from Tracy. Tracy says, for the younger students, I made a dictionary with simple words with a picture. Yeah. Students can build up their own dictionary. That's a really good idea. So yeah, including information about vocabulary. So the meaning, form, pronunciation, the meaning, the spelling of the word, the pronunciation, how to say it, the part of speech, a noun, of an adverb, an adjective, and so on. So we also need to discuss recycling new vocabulary. So it's been suggested that a student needs to use a new vocabulary item 5 to 16 times before they really know it. It seems quite a lot, doesn't it? So that's why it's very, very important to recycle our vocabulary. How do we do that? Well, there are many, many different ways to recycle our vocabulary. We can play word games like Scrabble, for example. We can use crosswords, word searches. We can play games like I Spy. We can play games like I Went to Market, for example. Matching activities, matching with adjectives, making collocations. Call My Bluff is a great word recycling game. Blankety blank. Think about all the great game shows that are out there that involve words, and you can adapt those for the classroom. Of course, there are lots of speaking and writing activities as well. So for homework, you can set a writing activity that uses the new vocabulary. You can set speaking tasks with the success criteria of using all the vocabulary, for example. So there's lots of great stuff out there. Of course, we should be aware and choosing the appropriate kind of activity or method of recycling vocabulary for the right age group, the right culture, and so on. Hangman comes up quite a lot. Of course, I try to avoid calling this kind of game hangman. It might be a sensitive topic, you never know, so best to kind of avoid it anyway. But you can use the same type of game in different contexts as well, like a person walking up the stairs, for example, or down the stairs into the swimming pool. So think about all the great and fun ways that you can use vocabulary to pre-teach. Let's talk about pre-teaching then. So just going to have a look back at your answers about pre-teaching vocabulary. So the overwhelming majority of you say yes, you should pre-teach vocabulary. Some of the comments are saying it's to give your students a basic idea of the language that's coming up. Yes. Okay. So I think the vast majority of teachers do pre-teach vocabulary, especially if it's new vocabulary that is likely to come up when you're introducing an article, a listening text, for example. So it's the kind of pretty good idea to pre-teach the vocabulary. The reason why I ask is that there is some school of thought that pre-teaching vocabularies is not kind of a natural thing to do. It's not something that occurs in the real world. When we encounter new vocabulary as a native speaker, no one pre-teaches it to us. If we're reading a novel or a book, I often come across new vocabulary that hasn't been necessarily pre-taught in the beginning of the book. I just get on with it and I use the context to work out the meaning and so on. I might make a note of new vocabulary. So in effect, I'm kind of learning as a student would do in the class. But it doesn't, of course, it doesn't do any harm. It can be very, very useful indeed to pre-teach vocabulary. Don't let me put you off. I just wanted to play devil's advocate there and thinking about why we pre-teach vocabulary. So if you've got any comments about that, I'll be very, very interested to hear what you say about that. Okay, let's go on to the Q&A session. But don't forget that you can see all the previous webinars. They're up on the TEFL Academy YouTube channel. And don't forget, if you've got any technical problems or questions about the course or so on, you can send a ticket to the tutor support and they can help you out. Okay, so let's go to a Q&A. If you've got any questions about teaching vocabulary, about pre-teaching, about concept checking questions, eliciting, now's your chance. So I love teaching new vocabulary. I love words, as most teachers do, and it can always be very encouraging when your students start using this vocabulary that you've been teaching to them. Always recycle, come back to it quite a few times as well. Encourage your students to make a vocabulary notebook or dictionary. Encourage your students to work out the context as well and meaning if the vocabulary that you come across in your lessons is not your focus, is not your target language. Okay, here's a few questions. Is pre-teaching the same as a warm-up? Not quite. No, it's a very good question, Andrew. A warm-up doesn't need even to be necessarily connected to your target language. It could be just setting the context of the topic, for example. You could use the vocabulary that you want to introduce as part of the warm-up if you wanted to. But also pre-teaching can also be a very focused part of the lesson. It can have a very, very intense focus on just the vocabulary that you want the students to know before you go into a listening or reading exercise, for example. So not necessarily the same thing. You could do a warm-up and then you can go in to, once you've warmed up your students, you've got them talking a little bit, interested in the topic, then you can go in and pre-teach your vocabulary items. I'd say, around about eight to 10 vocabulary items are good to do a pre-teaching session. Would Scrabble be a good game to use? Yeah. If it's appropriate for the level and the context of your teaching. I'm sure that most students would know some kind of variation on Scrabble. They would have seen that before. They would know the basic rules of the game, and you can make it level appropriate as well. You can actually use different versions of Scrabble. So there's Junior Scrabble. There's the kind of regular Scrabble. You can adapt it as well. You can make it more challenging. So definitely, I think Scrabble is a great activity to use. What do you mean, Rich? What sitting man? Is that an alternative to hangman or something like that? Please let me know, Rich. Thank you very much. Thanks, that's very encouraging. How many vocabulary words to be introduced in the lesson plan? Yeah, as I mentioned, I think around 8 to 10, no more than that, I would say. Think you know your class very well, but I think that's it, about the upper limit that you should use for your class. Do you know of any websites that splits words out according to a language level and maybe an optional context? Yeah, so the one I mentioned earlier, I think it's called Vocab Kitchen. These are language profile websites that can identify the level of a word. Of course, Chat GPT is quite good at that as well. If you put a text in there and ask to find me 8 words from this article that are at a B1 level, and it works very well. I encourage you to try that as well. Okay, are there any other questions? Timothy asks, can pre-teaching have an influence on the timing of your lesson, causing a lesson session to be too long? Well, of course, timing is very important, and you need to be aware about that. I wouldn't spend too long on a pre-teaching session because it's not going to be the main stage of your lesson. The main stage of any lesson comes at maybe the end of the lesson when you want your students to produce the language, and it's a kind of a freer production stage, free practice stage. So I would keep the pre-teaching fairly brief. Of course, you need to make sure that your students understand that, so don't move on from that. But don't, if again with elicitation, if your students don't know the word, don't labor the points, just convey the meaning of the word. But that's a good question. I always encourage teachers to start at the end of their lesson and move back, so kind of retrospectively build their lesson from the end in mind. So you start with a big chunk of the lesson for your productive time, and then you can build in the rest of the lesson plan from there. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like there are no more questions for now. I hope that's been useful for you all. Experiment with different ways of teaching vocabulary. Have fun teaching vocabulary. Think about the MFP. Design your concept checking questions very carefully. Elicit and don't tell. You'll get much more idea about what your students are capable of if you elicit rather than tell your students. And be aware of the timing of your lesson. Here's one last comment. Pre-teaching activities I'm aware of in native English classes is a list of words that students look up and complete homework on overnight and are studied in the next lesson. Yeah, that's one way to do it as well. Pre-teach, set as a homework assignment a bunch of words that you're going to encounter in the next lesson. That's a good way to think about it. Yeah, very good. Excellent. This is a way of flipping the classroom. So you get your students to do a lot of work on their own time when they're comfortable, and then in the lesson is your focus time for checking the concept and so on. Okay, so Rich says, yes, sitting man versus hangman. Thanks, Rich. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. It's been my pleasure to be with you today. We really appreciate your feedback. So please tell us what you think about our webinars and any ways that we can improve them. I'm going to put this link into the chat as well. Hopefully that will work. And don't forget that all of our webinars will be up on our YouTube channel. Okay, that's all from me today. I'm going to get some fresh air and try and cool down before I melt. So have a great weekend, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks a lot.